In 2024, I have read a total of 87 books in Japanese, which is the most that I have read in Japanese over the span of one single year. And today I'm gonna attempt telling you about each one of those books as fast as humanly possible. Otherwise, we're gonna be here for hours. Minasan konnichiwa, Ali desu. Hi everyone, my name is Ali. Welcome or welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing another booktube video focused on Japanese books. Since in 2024, I have mostly read in Japanese, and for comparison, in English I have read 2 books, a grand total of 2 books, just 1 book in Chinese, and in French, 0 books. And so really today's video is going to be focused on telling you about each one of those books that I've read in Japanese. I have categorized them in 3 categories. We have nonfiction, we have fiction, and then we have manga and comic. But other than that, I'm not going to classify them in any particular order because today my goal is to give you guys a bit of information about each book that I've read, hopefully make you discover some books that you haven't seen anywhere or that you've been, wondering about, and that maybe you've been wanting to read for yourself. Whether or not you have the level to read them in Japanese, I should say, does not really matter, I think, because a lot of the books that I've read this year have been translated, in fact, especially the fiction ones. So you will be able to find them in translation, whatever that language may be, because I've read some very, very famous pieces last year, so definitely they've been translated, don't worry about it. And then, other than that, I think that if you're a Japanese learner, you will also find a lot of books that probably you'll want to read for reading practice in Japanese, because I think that the majority of what I've read last year wasn't that complicated. You'll see it's like very, we've got highs and lows in terms of level, very high and very low level as well. It doesn't really matter. I don't really focus on that too much anymore since my level is now like averaged out, I want to say, like leveled out, and I can read pretty much anything I want to. That's the underlying theme to my reading year in 2024, and you'll see that probably my tastes come through a lot more in what I've read in 2024 than in previous years. So that's interesting, I think. And finally, I can call this YouTube channel a booktube channel. After all these years, I'm now finally able to enter this category. As you can probably tell, I am at my happiest when I can talk about books. And without further ado, I think we can get started, guys. So first category is gonna be non-fiction books. Let's get them out of the way. The drill, guys. Let me put my glasses on. I think we're good. So non-fiction books. I should say that I made an effort actually in 2024 to read more non-fiction books because first of all, I've got a lot on my TBR, on my to be read list. So that's the first thing. I wanted to, get through as many as possible over the course of the year. But second of all, it's also because I really needed to practice reading this kind of literature more and more, and especially academic literature. You'll see I have quite a few books there. The first one that I've got on my list is 死にたいけどトッポッキは食べたい. This book is actually translated from Korean, and it is, I think, quite famous in Korea. It gathered quite a lot of good criticism. I really enjoyed it. This was a very peculiar book because it's actually a collection of discussions that occurred between the author and her therapist, and they discuss a lot about depression because the author actually suffered from depression and generalized anxiety for years and years. And so the book is really focused on those 2 issues. And of course, because the author's depression is very linked to what she faced during her upbringing in Korea, and the fact that she's a woman, and the fact that she's trying to, get a good job, basically have a normal life in Korea. All of that comes with a lot of struggles in Korea, especially in modern society. So the book is really focused on that, and I found it really, really interesting and really insightful. Second book is やばい宇宙図鑑. This one was a cute little book for children, meant to give them lots of, very interesting facts about space, about astronauts, about astronomy. in general. And yeah, it was full of very cute pictures. It had a lot of texts everywhere, and it also had furigana on all of the kanji, since this is a book for children. Very cute one. Next, I have read 宇宙とは何か, which is a simplified academic literature book on space and astronomy, and specifically this one is focused around the question about what is space and how it has been interpreted and defined over the years and through the developments that science has seen these past few years. And the author himself is an astrophysicist working in the US, if I'm not wrong, and I've also seen quite a few of his interviews, and the guy himself is very interesting and actually very easy to understand, even in interviews. And I found this book pretty easy to understand as well. It was not as difficult as you may think, even though it's about astrophysics. It's actually quite understandable. It's really a popular science book, but more on the upper level in terms of difficulty. I would say it's right below an actual astrophysics textbook, but written in a much more accessible way, especially since it is centered around one single question. Next, I read さみしい夜にはペンを持て. You would have seen it featured in my vlogs around the beginning of the year, and if you remember, I didn't actually like it very much. So in this book, the author brings us through sort of a cautionary tale of this little boy who is a bit bullied at school, and through the help of someone he meets, he gets to put down on paper in his personal journal his thoughts and what gives him anxiety, especially about the bullying part. And so through the chapters, we understand that what the author is trying to say is that we better process our emotions and what gives us anxiety, what we have in our heads, if we write down on paper all of that and just explain it to ourselves, or write fictional letters to members of our family, that kind of thing. Essentially, processing emotions through writing is the underlying theme of this book, and then the author puts all of his argumentation within a fictional story of this little boy. I really didn't enjoy this book for multiple reasons, but mostly because of the writing and the fact that the author was trying to do something that I personally thought he wasn't very good at. And this kind of non-fiction through fiction story I have seen elsewhere, and there are several other books which I've read in the past that did it much better. I'm putting them on the screen right now. It's trying to do that, but it's not doing it very well. Then I read Smaho no. This one was absolutely amazing. Smaho no is once again a popular science book, but this time it is about neuroscience, and it is about, in this case, the addiction that we have to social media and to our phone in general, how it impacts us and our brain specifically. This book was absolutely wonderful. I would recommend this to absolutely anyone. In fact, I would encourage you, all of you, to read it, really. You can actually find it in English, since I think it was translated first into English and then translated to Japanese. Originally, if I'm not wrong, the author is a Swedish doctor, so the original language is Swedish, I think. Next, I have read はじめての哲学. This one was essentially a collection of biographies of some of the most prominent philosophers across history, and it was definitely interesting, and I got to hear about philosophers that I didn't actually have on my radar. So I would say that 80% of the philosophers presented in this book I already knew, but it was nice to read about them in Japanese to get the vocab about them and just their philosophy in general. But then the remaining part of the presented philosophers I didn't know about, so it was very nice to discover them. Next, we have いい質問が人を動かす. This is a book written by a Japanese bengoshi, a Japanese lawyer. So, of course, since I'm an ex-lawyer myself, I got a bit drawn towards the book, since I wanted to see what a Japanese lawyer had to say about communication. This book is about communication with others through questions, and specifically the right questions. What are good questions that actually bring up the awareness level of the people to whom we ask questions. So it's basically directed towards anyone who uses communication as a tool. So it's really in the category of self-help books, I would say. I found that the author's argumentation was like very logical. It's always useful to see like how other people categorize the advice, this kind of advice. I always find it very useful when it's well done, of course. So this was one of those books that I just found beneficial like in and of itself, even though essentially I didn't learn anything new. This is all stuff that I've already noticed for myself. So again, I didn't learn anything new, but still it was beneficial. So I still enjoyed it. Next, we have Gendai Shiso Nyumon, which is this time a proper like academic level book. Very, very difficult to get into and to go through, but I didn't give up because the subject is very, very interesting to me. This is about modern philosophy, and specifically modern philosophy through the eyes of a Japanese scholar, and this specific lens was very interesting to me, so I devoured this book nonetheless, even though it was probably the hardest thing I've read in Japanese, still to this day, except for classical literature. The author has a good writing style, which I was happy to read, and in fact I have several of his other books on my TBR right now, so it gives you a good indication as to how much I love this book. Then we have Kotoba no Mahou Zukan, which is a cute little vocab book, but for Japanese natives and specifically children, which focuses on those words and expressions, like really especially idiomatic expressions, which can be misinterpreted if you don't use them the correct way, like the right way. So essentially, when I take a step back now, it's a book about like communication skills for children, but also non-verbal skills, I guess, and like it's giving tips, little tips to children on how to interpret like social cues and how to read the room, the famous social skills which all Japanese people seem to have, like which seems to be innate in them. Apparently it's not, because if it were, there wouldn't be such books on the market. So this is a book entirely about this. It was okay, I'm not the target, so I didn't expect to absolutely love this book, but it was a nice quick read, and it was on my TBR for a while because I think everyone and their mother have read this book, so I was just happy to go through it for myself. Then we have Gambari sigi zuni kiraku ni. I mean, this was again a book translated from Korean. This again attracted a lot of attention this past few years. I don't think I've read it under the right circumstances, I would say, because I didn't really enjoy this book, like not particularly, but at the same time it's not like I didn't enjoy it, it's just that some parts resonated with me, some other parts didn't, like not specifically. I would say that overall it was a nice average of enjoyment for me when reading it. It was quite fast to read it. It's written in like a journal format almost, so the author really like takes a theme generally about relationships and like social interactions, that kind of theme. And again, we're talking about Korean society, which in Korea it's really, I think the social pressure is particularly strong. It's pretty bad. Let's just say that. So again, this book is about that. It kind of resembles, in the tone, it kind of resembles 死にたいけどトッポッキは食べたい. But yeah, this one is not in the form of conversations. It's really in the form of the author writing about certain topics as if she would write about those topics in her own journal. And I think probably that's what happened. She collected those together and put them into a book. At least that's how it feels. Then I read Memo no Marioku, which was a book that was on my TBR like for the longest time, probably since I've started reading in Japanese, so since 2020. And yeah, this one was fairly good. In this book, the author explains us what his note-taking techniques are and why, and what is behind his note-taking techniques that he developed for himself. But if you take a step back, he's actually using techniques that were theorized about probably like 20 to 30 years ago. So I wouldn't say that it's anything new under the sun. I didn't learn anything specific, but it was still nice to hear about his his own logic behind it and what he uses his note-taking for and how he gains more clarity on his own thoughts and his thought processes and how he extracts the best information and the most useful information out of his notes and how he's gotten better at it over the years. It was just like overall a nice little like quick read for me. Very easy to read. Would recommend if you're interested in this kind of topic. And also I should mention that at the end of the book there is a full table of prompts on how to essentially improve yourself through writing. 100 questions I think per theme, something like this. Like for example, one theme would be explore your past, for example, and one other theme would be relationships. And in each category you have 100 questions to answer. That would make a nice like collection of journaling prompts for you to answer in Japanese. I'm just saying, if you need prompts, those are very good journaling prompts in my opinion. So if Japanese is your target language, then I would advise you to maybe check out this book in particular, just for that. Then I have read 読むだけ小論文基礎編 Power Up版, which is a book that contains examples of essays, so dissertations written in Japanese around 13 topics, and those topics are the topics that basically come up the most at university entrance exams here in Japan, and I got to see a lot of useful vocab in this book and therefore learn a lot of useful vocab. So very nice one. And finally, in the non-fiction category, we have なぜ働いていると本が読めなくなるのか, which was a wonderful book about why we stop reading when we become working adults. You've seen me talk about this book a lot, and it was really nice to read this book because it gave me a lot of useful info and insights on, you know, the history of Japan, the history of books in Japan and how they've been perceived over the years and the ages and the decades, and also the history of the work culture. And this book gave me a nice like little background around the reading culture and the reading habits of Japanese people. As for the arguments of the author as to, you know, the answer to why we stop reading when we work, you know, her argument revolves around the fact that when we work and when we become working adults, we've got less mental space for things like reading, especially reading fiction. And her argument revolves around this, and I definitely would agree with this. I think it's a phenomenon that all of us have experienced to an extent, you know. I would agree with the author for the most part. Very clever book, very smart in the way she wrote it as well. I've read that she's originally a literary critic, and definitely you can see that come through in the way she writes. So you can definitely tell that she actually has a background in literature. So that's interesting. Alright, next category, guys. What I've read in the fiction category in 2024, and we start with a collection of short stories by none other than Haruki Murakami, which was Onna no Inai Otokotachi. And in this collection in particular, you have the story Drive My Car, which has, of course, inspired the script of the famous movie now, Drive My Car, that has actually won an Academy Award, I think, in 2023, if I'm not wrong. And I absolutely love this short story collection. Not every single short story like resonated with me, but still I would say that 6 out of 7 I really liked. But I mean, by now I'm not really objective anymore with Murakami because I'm definitely a fan of like his writing choices, his writing style, and the themes that he chooses to write about. I'm just a fan of everything. Then we've got 私たちが光の速さで進めないなら, which was again a short story collection, but this time a science fiction short story collection, and translated from Korean because the author is Korean, and I believe that this book is her debut book, which is mind-blowing to me because this was fantastic. And I pretty much loved, except for one story, I pretty much loved every single one story. And yeah, to be honest, like I still think about those stories like to this day, even though I've read this book quite early in the year. So that's just to tell you like how much I liked the stories and the characters. The stories are not connected unrelated to one another. They're completely different in the theme, in the environment. Characters are different. Like, there's absolutely no link between the short stories, but they're all very, very special and unforgettable in their own way. So yeah, I hope that this gives you motivation to read this one, because that was really good one. You can definitely read it in English too, I think. I think it was translated to English. Very good science fiction. Then we've got Ningen Shikaku by Dazai Osamu, which is classical literature. This is a book that has a lot of trigger warnings, I'll tell you this, so I can't really say much about the book without getting a strike from YouTube, so I won't tell you much details about the book. Just know that it is quite hard to read in the language, in the theme, and also just in the general like atmosphere from the book that, you know, comes through the pages. Is quite hard, like it's quite heavy, even though it's a short book. I think it's like 150 pages if I remember correctly. It took me ages to read because I just didn't want to pick it up. I mean, it's so heavy in the theme, it was really hard to go through. I still liked it. I think the author is conveying what he was trying to convey, but he does it a little bit too well, in my opinion. It's just a depressing book, okay? Then we've got Hisoyaka na Kesho, so The Memory Police by Ogawa Yoko, which I have been raving about for the past few months since I've read it. I love this book, top favorite. This is a science fiction dystopian book, and it is about mainly 3 characters who live on an island that is subject to an authoritarian government, which steals the island inhabitants' memories and literally, like quite literally, takes the memories from them about various things. So it can be people, it can be things, it can be like concepts, it can be like animals, and just like makes them forget about those things. So that's quite intense. The stakes are quite high, but just in general, I absolutely love the writing style. It just speaks to me a lot and I couldn't put it down. And I think this is the biggest book I've read in Japanese. And now I'm on a quest to read every single one of Ogawa Yoko's books. So again, loved it. Then we've got the absolute opposite book in terms of enjoyment and in terms of rating, because we have Ariadone no Koe, which I hated with every fiber of my being. This is a science fiction book. I really hesitate to say this is science fiction because it doesn't even deserve any sort of category, in my opinion. This is just like light novel, and it's not very deep at all, and it's just like not enjoyable to read at all. Not very well written, not well balanced in anything. The theme, the characters, nothing is believable. It's about this smart city that gets constructed partly underground, and essentially it's supposed to, once it will be open, suffice to itself. The inhabitants will be able to essentially live off the smart city without ever leaving it. So that's the intention. And then they've got this like big system of drones powered by AI, if I remember correctly, which will be like useful to deliver stuff, maintain security inside the walls of the smart city. But then during the inauguration of the smart city, something happens, and then you've got a sort of a thriller happening, well, suspense kind of story happening. It's just like extremely disappointing. This is just not for me. I'm not the target for this kind of book, and I wouldn't recommend it myself. Next, I've read Manga de Yomu Pesto. So this is a manga transcription of The Plague by French author Albert Camus, and I also hated this book. It was not good at all, a pain to read. It's literally the story of The Plague, but in a manga format, plus some like background story that the Japanese author like put in there, but it doesn't serve any purpose. Not very well made, to be honest with you, and I just didn't like it. I'm trying to forget that I ever read this because it's almost like deteriorating the memory that I have of the actual book, which I loved when I read it many years ago in original French. Then I read Shisha no Koin o Sagase from the Yurei Sakawa o Isogashi series, which is a children's book series, and this was the book number 3 in the series. Very cute one. We still follow the same characters in this book series. This whole series is actually translated from English. I would would recommend. It's quite a cute book series. It's got a lot of pictures in it, lots of illustrations, lots of like word puns as well, which have been translated into the Japanese, so that's also amazing, I think. A really great job done by the translator. Then we've got the short story Paya o Sou by Haruki Murakami. This was probably the only one short story from this collection which I didn't quite like at the same level as the other ones. In this short story we follow two characters who essentially at one point during the night get very hungry, and so they decide to go and rob a bakery to get 3 things to eat essentially from the bakery. Of course it's still Murakami, so I still enjoyed the writing and the theme and all, but it's just that the theme itself did not resonate with me as much as the other themes. I read this like in one sitting. It's very quick to read those short stories. Then the next one was also another short story from Murakami, which is Nemuri. In this one, the main character has such bad insomnia that she essentially doesn't sleep at all anymore. It's not even that she sleeps like late during the night. It's just like she doesn't sleep at all. And this goes on for days and days. So you can imagine that she starts having like sort of hallucinations and she's not really there anymore. And she doesn't even know what's happening. Like she really doesn't know what's happening with her. This was amazingly written. This was such a peculiar and original story. Like I loved everything about it. Then we've got Kitchen by Yoshimoto Banana, which I absolutely loved. This was a great short story collection. It's got 3 short stories in it. The first 2 stories are linked, they follow one another, and then the last short story is entirely different. This was heartbreaking. This really resonated with me a lot. It's about loss, especially family loss. It's also about love a lot. It's about uplifting relationships. It's just a very masterful piece of literature. And to think that this was Yoshimoto Banana's debut novel, again, mind-blowing to me. I can't believe that people have such talent. I just cannot believe this. And then finally, I have read Kokoro by Natsume Soseki. This is once again classical literature. In this book, we follow the main character who is a university student at the beginning of the 20th century in Japan. And he gets to know a man who is much older than him, and they begin to form a friendship. And so the main character ends up like visiting this man who he calls sensei, so professor. He begins to visit him at his house, so he also forms a friendship with sensei's wife. So for the 1/3 of the book, it's just, you know, the conversations between those characters and sensei telling the main character everything he knows about life, essentially, and human relationships. And I can't tell you more than this because otherwise it will be a spoiler, but just so you know, this was one of my favorite books of the year and probably one of my favorite books ever read in Japanese. I absolutely loved this. It was quite hard to read, but nonetheless one of the biggest pieces of literature written in Japanese. So I really wanted to push through right to the end, and I was right to do so because again it became one of my favorites. Alright, so that's it for the fiction books, and now for the last part, let's move on to the manga and comic category. Alright guys, for this next category, I'm in front of my shelves right here, just because I needed to be closer to my screen right here, my laptop, to clearly see all of the book covers and the book titles, because I've read quite a few comics in 2024, so I really want to go through the list as fast as possible. Alright guys, so first off, we've got the series Shini tai to itte kudasai, of which I have read the book 2, book 3, and I think book 4. Yes. This manga series I had started in 2023, and then I just moved along to the other books in the series. The book series is all about Japanese social workers who specifically help people in mental distress and who potentially want to harm themselves or harm others. So I know this is quite a heavy topic, but when reading this kind of stories, if you're not triggered yourself, I would really recommend reading this, because I believe that actually all of the stories are real. Those are real cases and they've just like changed, they've tweaked up a few details about the patients, and of course not giving their names or anything. But other than that, like the actual events, as soon as the social workers were alerted that something was up, and then, going from the first call onto either like hospitalization or just treatment in general, this is gripping, especially when those are real cases. And it tells you a lot about how this works in Japan, which I found very interesting. Just, out of pure interest, I was interested to know how it happened in Japan, how they treated mental illnesses, and especially urgencies linked to mental illness. And in this manga series, you really get to see the details of how it happens. So once again, if you're not triggered reading this kind of stories, then I would highly recommend. Then I have read Ninjin X, which I really didn't like. This was the first book, and each book in the manga series is about a different serial killer. And so this first book really gave me the taste of the series, I believe, and I just didn't enjoy anything about it. The tone, the story itself, the characters, nothing made sense. Nothing seemed like either natural or, I don't know, realistic. It was not realistic at all. Nowadays, I'm much more picky about the things that I actually read when it concerns these topics. But this manga in particular, I was not the target of, and I could really feel it, I really didn't enjoy this. Then in the Ito Junji premium collection of stories, I have read volume 3 till volume 11. So essentially I've entirely finished, it's right here, that's why I'm looking in this direction, but I've entirely finished reading the premium collection of manga. Each volume was like 400 pages to 600 pages, so quite big, and in there you've got like at least 10 different manga like collated into one big manga volume. And just to give you like the highlights of all of these books were really the number 3 because it was about one character in Ito Junji's like universe, which I really like. I really like this character, and so I was really happy to read those stories and to read about this character and his development and his history, all of that. And then there was one other collection which like really stood out, which was the retelling in manga form by Ito Junji of the Frankenstein story. Oh my god, this was amazing. Usually I don't like retellings, but I must admit that this one, retold by Ito Junji, was a masterpiece all over again. Number 10 in the collection. Then we've got Mental Zuyome Bijo Shirakawa-san. I think I'm saying this right. This was the first book in the manga series of the same name, and I think it's even adapted into a TV drama, a TV series. We follow the main character, who's essentially a noeru, so an office lady in Japan, and it's about, her life at the office and how she manages to stay afloat, being faced with many kinds of harassment and all sorts of things, but towards which she acts very strong, actually. She's a very strong woman, she has strong reactions, she has a strong character, hence the title, and I found it enjoyable, but I don't think I'm the target. It was just like, nice little read. Won't read the whole series though. Then we have Miura-san no Tomodachi, which was written by an author that I actually really like. What's her name again? Masuda Miri. And in this particular comic, we follow this main character who's a woman who purchases a robot to keep her company at home because she's extremely lonely. She feels very lonely, and it's all about this friend, a robot friend, and the relationship they have, even though the robot cannot utter more than 5 words, a grand total of 5 words. I remember feeling quite sad actually reading this story, because it seems to me that it's the kind of thing that could actually happen in real life, and I think that if I were this lonely too, I would definitely do this sort of stuff. So I think, being honest with myself, that's why I felt sad when I read it, because it felt quite realistic and the sort of thing that would actually happen. And I think it's an underlying theme with this author in everything that she writes, or draws rather, because all of her comics have this sort of vibe to them. All of them are quite sad too, sometimes very funny as well. It's just like very well packaged little stories that she comes up with very masterfully, I must say. Then we've got again something from Ito Junji, which is Ito Junji no Neko Nikki, Yon to Mu. This one here, So it's a very, very funny, it's full of little like skits of things that happened to Ito Junji in real life with the two cats that he and his wife have adopted at home, and it's just like hilarious. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've laughed while reading this book, and my husband too, like actually laughing out loud. It was that funny, especially because we are cat lovers and also owners ourselves, so obviously we're the target for this kind of book. But what's even more funny to me is that Ito Junji is a horror mangaka. He writes and draws only horror stories. So the fact that he put together this story about his two cats is just like too funny to me, to be honest. Then I have started reading the first book in the manga series called Monster, which is apparently quite a famous manga series, like comic series. I think it's been around since like the 80s or the 90s, if I'm not wrong, so it's quite old as well. I plan on, continuing to read it, just not right now because I'm not in the mood. I think you definitely need to be in the mood to read this kind of stuff. And once again, this is about a serial killer, actually. And also, it's not set in Japan, it's set in Europe. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's set in Germany. Then, from the manga collection, Uchi no neko ga mata henna koto shiteru, I have read books 3 to 8, I think. Yeah, 3 to 8. In 2024. Each book is basically a collection of skits retelling the daily events and daily funny things that the author's cats do at home. So this is nonfiction. She's not inventing anything. She's just like literally transcribing onto the page the little funny things that her cats do. And once again, I am very much the target for this kind of books. And my husband is too. And both of us like this manga series very, very much. So we read every single book that comes out in the series as soon as it comes out, and in 2024 I think we got 2 books in the series, so this was very good year. Then I have read Dobe to Nora number 1 and number 2, and there is a 3rd book coming up in 2025. So these 2 books are obviously by the same author, and they're about the author's dogs. First dog being a Doberman, hence the name Dobe, and the second dog being a stray dog, hence the name Nora, because in Japanese you use this prefix to call animals who've been living outside, essentially, who are strays, for dogs and cats. So you say Noraneko and Norainu. And so anyway, this is almost in the same format as Uchi no neko ga mata henna koto shiteru, because essentially it's a collection of skits retelling the daily events that the author has with his dogs. It's really, really cute. It's really funny. Then from the series Smiley, I have read number 8, 9, and 10 in 2024. This manga series is very, very dark. It's got a lot of killings happening in it, and it's about this sect that essentially forces its members to smile all the time. And from volume 8 to 10, the volumes I've read in 2024, we got to hear a lot more about the original story of the sect and why it came into being and why the founders did what they did and why they founded the sect in the first place. So it was pretty interesting to read. And yeah, I think the last volume will be the number 11th, so we're almost at the end of the series now. Another series that I continued was Tome Otoko to Ningen Onna, of which I have read volumes 5 and 6. This is a cute little romance manga series between this girl who actually cannot see, so she's blind, and she is the secretary of a private profiler, private detective, and this detective happens to be an invisible man. So basically they fall in love with each other and they get very close, and eventually they just become a couple. And so the manga series is all about them. It's really cute. Then I have read Bibirineko Meiko-san ni Natsukaretai, and this was a cute little one-off manga about this very, very scared little cat. I didn't enjoy this very much, so to be honest with you, I don't really remember lots of details about it. It was a quick, nice read, but I didn't really enjoy this. Then we've got the Hennaie manga series, of which I have read every single manga, so from 1 to 4, and I've really, really enjoyed this a lot. This is again suspense thriller manga series. This is all about very, very strange house layouts. This is like the mystery in the manga series. And so the main character becomes very intrigued with those houses. When you look at the layout, you essentially cannot make sense of why the house has been built this way, unless there is a specific reason and unless you wanted to hide stuff in the house. And so it starts from that point. And then I can't tell you more because it'll be a spoiler, but essentially it's suspense, like I said, and it's got thriller elements to it. Then we have じゃああんたが作ってみろよ, which is another manga series, and I've read the first book only. We follow, in this case, a main character who's a man and who doesn't know how to cook for himself, and so through the help of his different girlfriends he finally becomes able to cook by himself and for himself, and it's just like a very funny satirical little piece, and yeah, I enjoyed it for the most part. But I haven't read book 2 and I don't think I will, so I mean it was fine. Then I have read Nami Uraraka ni Meo to Biori, books number 1 to I think 6, and this manga series is quite peculiar because it is about a Japanese couple, but he is a marine officer and she is his wife, and so essentially when they get married they don't know each other because they get married through their families, and so before the day of their marriage they don't know each other, but then once they're married they get to know each other better and better, and so the whole series follows their couple from their marriage, so it's like in a reverse order kind of, and it's just like very cute, but at the same time there are some elements to it which I'm a bit like dubious about because obviously it's told from an entirely Japanese perspective and targeted at a Japanese audience. Like some elements are a bit annoying to me. I will continue reading the series, but yeah, nonetheless there are some elements that I find a bit annoying, let's say. Then we've got the book Hashtag Shinso Hanashi Shimasu, which is once again a thriller manga. This is also a series, but I think originally it's not a manga. Originally it's a novel, and so I read the manga version, the first book in the manga version, and this was like average thriller manga. And yeah, I mean, I don't have much to say about this one, sorry. So it was just like really average thriller manga, which I tested reading, and I don't think I'll be reading more books in the series. Then I have read 会社を辞めて喫茶店始めました. This was a biographical retelling of this woman basically retiring from her office job in order to open a cafe in Japan, so 喫茶店, traditional Japanese cafe. And this was really cute, a really cute story. This was a one-off, and she just wanted to tell in a manga format what her story has been like, you know, all the drawbacks that she has experienced, and in general, her whole experience opening a cafe in Japan. So this was really cute. Then I have read the third installment in the Nemurenu Yori wa Keiki o Yaite series. I had already read the first comic essays in the series, and this was a nice third installment, but to be honest, I mean, it's just the same as the other two books in the series, so I just read this, you know, out of interest. So, you know, it's not like particularly interesting, it's just a nice little addition to the series. So the third installment, this is a recipe book, but within a comic essay. So the main character essentially has insomnia quite a lot, and because she likes to cook for herself, essentially when she wakes up at night, she bakes cakes. So she's got 1,000 different little recipes to bake very simple cakes at home by herself at night. So that's what this whole book series is about. And at the end of each chapter, you get the whole recipes of the cakes that she bakes. So that's quite cute, not gonna lie. Then I have read probably one of the saddest manga I have read in 2024, and it was Kesamo ano ko no yume o mita. This was a heart-wrenching story about this guy who is in his 40s and who lives alone because his ex-wife separated him from their daughter, and so the ex-wife is now living somewhere else with their daughter, so they are divorced. He's had absolutely zero contact with his daughter for like the past about, I think, 13 years. So it's very, very sad. And the main character, who's a colleague of his, they work together at this supermarket, I think. She tries to help him find out where his daughter lives now and where she goes to school, and the whole story is about that, and it's really, really heart-wrenching. I'm not gonna lie, I actually cried reading this. Then I have read 私が誰だかわかりましたか, which was a one-off story about this woman who falls head over heels for someone she meets on a dating app, and it turns out that this person that she starts to fall in love with is not the person that she thinks he is, and so the whole story revolves around that, hence the title. It's actually quite clever, quite well made. I really enjoyed this. Then I have read the 2 books in the series Yonaki Goya, so number 1 and number 2, so Jo and Ge, and this was actually really nice. So each chapter is about a mom, usually a new mom, so moms of newborns, who find it difficult to sleep at night because their newborns cry a lot. And a lot of those moms, so each mom being a different character in the story, decide to get out of their apartments. Some of the time it's because, the kid likes to go to sleep while in movement, so they just like stroll around the park, for example, but essentially they go outside for that. Or it is because they want to escape the apartment because their husbands are not happy that the kid is screaming at night, and so they basically tell their wives to get out with the kids, which they do, which is quite sad, but that's how it is. So you've got these moms with their kids strolling around the city at night, and they all gather in one place, which is sort of a cafe, like rest place, opened only at night for moms who need a place to rest with their kids. And so the whole story is about that, and they all gather there and they exchange tips and stories and they support each other. So very, very cute, like sorority themed manga, and yeah, it was really nice. If you have an interest in this kind of story, then I would recommend. It gives you a good insight into Japanese culture surrounding infants and newborns. Then I read Rampo no Bishoku. Really didn't like this. It's the first book in the series, but I will not be reading the other books. This is a series about this guy who, he's a private investigator, and so whenever he goes out to go after a target for his investigations, he makes sure to go to nearby restaurants and try lots of different foods. And so we follow him around, every single restaurant that he goes to. And it's not realistic. It's not smart at all. I feel like it's written by a 10-year-old. The kind of stuff that he says is so cringe. I can't even begin to tell you. It's just it's awful. Then I have read So Okuru Boku no Nee-chan, which I absolutely loved. Once again, this is written by the same author as the one I was telling you about before, so Masuda Miri. And in this one, we follow a sister and her brother, actually, and little conversations that they have, and it's mostly funny, and it's also very touching. And once again, I just love anything that this author writes. I know now that I'm a fan. I just like everything that she writes. Then I have read Mamatomo ga Kawaii by the author of Kieta Mamatomo, Nohara Hiroko, and once again, we follow a story in which the main character is a mom. This time, it's really about this new mom who has a hard time fitting in with the other moms of young children. I think their children are 4 years old, and so you've got this whole mom community forming around the kids, and this particular mom, so the MC, the main character, finds it really, really difficult to get along with the other moms. And in particular, there is one specific mom who essentially starts bullying her, so that's actually quite bad. It made me quite scared of becoming a mom myself here in Japan and actually having to face this kind of woman in the mom's circle. Now I'm genuinely terrified to meet Mamatomo. Then we've got Tsuma no Iede, which was once again a heart-wrenching story. I cried at the end of this story when I finished reading it because it was really unexpected, the ending, at least for me. I didn't see it coming, and it was just extremely sad. So it's about this man whose wife suddenly leaves home one day when they're 50 years old, I think. So he's still a salaryman. He still works full time, and she essentially is a wife at home, even though they haven't got kids, I think. I can't remember. But nonetheless, it's just them now at the house, and his wife leaves one day. And so it's about his life after his wife leaves, and his wife, through letters, like still guides him to live by himself and like do things for himself. So for example, how to cook, how to clean the house, how to read more, go to the movies, go and see friends, essentially things that he never did for himself and that they never did together as a couple. And yeah, so majority of the book is just that, a succession of letters that, you know, each time gives him a challenge to complete, and then we follow him trying to do just that and to follow what his wife says, because he has the hope that she will come back. And I can't tell you much more than this. Then we've got 離婚してもいいですか number 1 and number 2, which I've read one after the other. I just couldn't stop. I needed to read the second one like right away once I'd read the first one. And this was amazing. Once again written by the one and only Nohara Hiroko. This was just amazing. This time we follow, so for each book, one different woman who starts feeling, so both of them, who start feeling more and more like something's wrong in their couple life with their husband. Both of them have kids, and one day they just decide that, you know, it's time to divorce, it's time to get out, or at least for their husband to leave the family. And so it follows their thought process towards this decision. Again, very insightful into family dynamics in Japan and how they talk to each other as well. To me, it's like kind of the most interesting part, the language part. Are you really surprised at me saying this? Then I have read 私は家族がわからない, which is a story told from the perspective of a kid, this time a girl, who we follow from the age of, I think, 4 to 15, if I'm not wrong. She witnesses her family and especially her parents' relationship deteriorate before her eyes. So it's quite sad once again, and again it's quite insightful, you know, in terms of family dynamics in Japan, but at the same time the story itself is just like quite curious, to say the least. It's quite peculiar, but at the same time it's quite realistic, I think, in my opinion. I would really recommend this, very easy to read. Then I have read the 2 books in the series 霊感一家の不思議な実話, all about ghost stories this time, and this is actually non-fiction. If you believe in ghosts, this is non-fiction because the author is a medium herself and she sees spirits, or at least she can interact with them in some way. So she either hears them or sees them. The other women in her family also can, and so in those 2 books she collects all of the scenes of all of the different events that occurred, hauntings that they've experienced as a family. Then I have read Shikaku, which is a horror anthology of different horror manga stories written by different mangakas, but there was one in there that was written by Ito Junji, so this is why I picked this one up. Apart from the story by Ito Junji, this was not good specifically, so I wouldn't particularly recommend it to you guys. Then I have read Uzumaki, which is a one-off manga by Ito Junji. Once again, I have read a lot of Ito Junji in 2024, so this was once again a manga by him, this time a collection of stories which was set in the same town, and as the name suggests, it's about spirals and the magic powers of spirals which suddenly start to appear everywhere in this little town. We follow obviously the bad things that happen in the town because it's a horror manga because of the spirals appearing everywhere. And then we're coming on to the end because this is the last comic I've read. 精神科病棟の青春あるいは高校時代の特別な1年間について. This was about the real story of how the author essentially got hospitalized at a special medical facility in Japan when she was still in high school, so she was between 15 and 16, I think, because she got anorexia and quite a bad case of it. She needed extra care and extra help at the time. And you could think that this was quite a horrible story since she was so young, but actually it's the opposite. This was a really heartwarming story, in fact, and the author herself and her family get surprised by this, by the fact that she actually fares really well at the hospital and she gets to meet lots of lovely people who all support each other, and It's just like a very heartwarming, like, community story. As for her experience, apparently it was very positive, and I did cry, but this time not from sadness, it was more from I was very touched. It really resonated with me. We finished on a good note because this one was definitely a favorite of mine last year. So that's it for all of the manga and comics I have read in 2024. Alright guys, and I think that's gonna be it for today's video. I'm not going to drag this on for too long because I think this video was probably already an hour long. I'm happy I got to do it, but now I'm dreading the edit a lot because I think it's gonna take me literally days to edit today's video. So I'm gonna stop it right here. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments below what you have read in your target language in 2024, or your target languages actually. And as for me, I will see you in my next video. それではまた次の動画でお会いしましょう。バイバイ。またね。 'Cause tonight I'm gonna